Hello, my name is Jarrett Mitchell, and this is my presentation on the class community-based corrections and what I learned from this class. This is kind of my presentation final that I'm turning in for my grade. Introduction to the course. And community-based corrections course, it shows what happens after an inmate has finished up their stay in prison and begins the process of rejoining the community. What we learned was different ways we can prepare people for the community while keeping the uh, keeping people safe from harmful habits of this individual. Now, ready. Topics covered: history of probation, pretrial supervision, residential community programs, reentry programs, and juvenile justice, probation, and parole. Okay, start off with is the history of probation. The idea of probation in America was founded by John Atticus in the Americas. There's another guy in England that I will go over here in a second, Matthew Hill, that also was laying groundwork for parole in England. But for John Atticus, he began working with in pre-trial supervision before they actually went to prison to kind of correct what they've been doing. Matthew Hill laid groundwork for later parole use in England. He is also, even though John Atticus is noted as the founder, Matthew Hill is also another very important individual in community-based corrections. Matthew Hill kept track of juveniles and got reports from their parent or guardian on their conduct, whether or not they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And under Matthew, 80 out of the 417 cases that he saw in the 12-year span of his career were reconvicted. So that's a pretty successful reconviction, very successful rehabilitation rate. Pre-trial supervision, talking about pre-trial supervision that's still going on today. So when a defendant is released on bail, or part of like sometimes if it's a very minor case, they'll be released on pretrial supervision. This is before the trial ever happens. The reason that they are placed on pretrial supervision before trial is to make sure that they appear in court when court comes around. An alternative to pretrial supervision is a diversion program, which is still a pretrial program, but it's for like first-time offenders and minor offenders. The difference between pretrial supervision and diversion is that diversion does not leave a criminal record. So that's always a good thing to happen when it's your first offense. Next, we're going to talk about residential community programs. So in residential community programs, a lot of times they, on top of everything else as part of their probation, they'll be sent to residential community programs. There, a lot of times they will have counseling programs like anger management or drug and alcohol counseling, things like that. Most people that go to these community programs, usually like halfway houses and stuff like that, have to follow basic rules in order to stay there and not be in violation of their probation or parole. Some of the following rules would be like they have to be employed, stay up on their rent, and pre-approved to leave when other than work. So they gotta basically tell the staff of the halfway house where they're going, what they're doing every day. Halfway houses are there are two individuals that really go to halfway houses. That's why they're called halfway houses. So first one would be half out, would be like minimum security inmates that are going to these halfway houses that are pretty close to about a year. They're about like a year ready to be moving out into the community or going on probation. So they are going into these halfway houses and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're almost out. The second kind of individual would be half in. Half in individuals would be high risk people that are already on probation and parole. And sometimes they're like high risk because they are not following the rules of their probation and they need more supervision than what they are already on. A lot of times, sadly, those individuals that are there at the halfway house that are half in, this could be their next stop before returning back to prison. Re-entry programs. Now, with re-entry programs that we're talking about re-entry back into society, this is kind of going to be probably a small little slide, but re-entry programs, they're going to be talking about while they're on probation, parolees can be placed on these programs. Some of these are part of being in the halfway house or just regular supervision that we normally have. They could be anything from treatment programs or anything that could help the individual get back on their feet. So it could be like helping them get a job or find a place to live. Because a lot of times with their record, they can have an issue finding jobs, finding work, finding a place to stay because they could be a convicted felon. But helping these individuals get back on their feet, excuse me, helping these individuals get back on their feet can actually keep them from reoffending, because if they have a place to stay, have an income, then it's less likely for them to go commit more crime because they don't have ways to support themselves. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is juvenile justice, probation, and parole. Dealing with juveniles. Dealing with these juveniles, there's really four groups that kind of make up a juvenile that you have to look out for. You got to look out for family, like stuff that's in their lives that you have to kind of look out for. It's either it could go very good or very bad. That influences the child would be family, school, neighborhood, and the individual themselves. So we'll start with the family. Dealing with their family, that could, for the juvenile, the reason that they are maybe committing could be because of their family. So their parents could be abusing them, or they could be abusing drugs, or they could just not be in that kid's life that much, and there's lack of supervision, and they just don't feel attachment to their family. Next, we'll go over school. So a lot of times these kids could have learning disabilities, low attachment to teachers, or they just can't connect with their peers properly. Either they're antisocial or they are trying to impress their peers, where it ends up leading to them committing crime. That's another thing to look for, is what's their life at school. Next, I'm going to talk about their neighborhood. A lot of times the environment that a child is around can influence how they are. So talking about their neighborhood, we could talk about their crime rate. Like if they live in a crime rate or a low poverty area, or even a place where that's low social capital, where there's not a lot of services in that area and it's just run down, falling apart, and it's exposed to gangs, crimes, drugs, that can always influence a juvenile and going down the wrong path. Finally, I want to talk about the individual juvenile themselves, because the individual juvenile is the biggest thing that we need to look for. Now, that could cause what's going on. There could be drug abuse, low self-control. They could have a conduct disorder. They just act out because they're angry. Again, tied to any one of those first three. Or they could just have mental illness, because a lot of times people like schizophrenia, you could be hallucinating and acting out because of that hallucinations. So that's always something to keep an eye on, especially if you're working with juveniles in probation and parole. Keep an eye on those four things when dealing with the parolee, is probably the best way to get them on the right track. Takeaway for this course. My takeaway of this course or class was that there is more to working in community-based corrections than I first thought. I always thought that it was more of you're out, but if you mess up, then you go back to jail. But the world of probation is much more than that. It is about getting people back into society and making a difference in their lives. The most challenging part of this course was learning about the pre-trials and everything that goes into that. I always found that kind of just very technical. Like when we first started doing this class, it was just a very technical part, and I just always struggled with it. My biggest question that I have is how stressful is working in this field? Is it more or less stressful than working corrections? Because I do have a little bit of a history of working in juvenile corrections. I know it can be tough going in, working 12, 16 hours a day, being around the youth all day can be emotionally strenuous or straining or just very hard to do. And I'm just, my biggest question is it a little bit easier to do because you're kind of taking a step back, not dealing with, okay, you need to follow this rule, this, and just staying on top of them, but instead you are giving them, they have a little bit more free roam because they are still in the community. It's just one of the things I've always wondered. Or is it more stressful because they are out in the community and they have a bigger chance to be committing new crimes and getting charged, and ultimately it falls on you? And so let me know what you think of that. These are my references. This is the end of this video, end of this presentation. Thank you for watching, and take care.